I'm not in tropical sunny climes today. I'm at the Motor Museum studio in Liverpool. Well, we are here in...
Shall I go? I didn't say a word.
So we're in the Motor Museum studio in Liverpool, and I'm with Al Groves, producer, engineer, studio guru, expert. This is the drum room. It's awesome, isn't it? I don't know if you'll be able to hear this on the video, but it's like really bouncy, stone and so on. What's the crack with the drum kit then? Is that your usual spec for setting it up?
This is my kit. It's an old 60s Ludwig. It's just like a really standard. Everybody in Liverpool has one.
They do.
Or everybody in Britain has one. But I've had it for years and really like it. This is probably pretty much how it gets mic'd. I'd say every day I do sessions now. I don't think it's particularly unorthodox. It's pretty standard really. What is it now? D112 in the kick. Something I've just started using is a Neumann TLM 170 outside, which for years and years and years I'd use a sub kick.
Yeah.
And just on a whim decided I wonder why I'm using the sub kick every day.
Yeah.
And not trying anything else. So me and an engineer, we got pretty much all the mics we had that weren't already assigned to other places on the kit. Tried everything, and this thing just particularly sung that day. So
cool. And you've got an NS10 speaker over there.
And it's fine. It does what they all do. It does what it does. But this just seems to have get a little bit more resonance, and it's just a new flavour now. That's going to.
And you've gone for the felt, very traditional.
Yeah.
Felt strip.
To be honest, I think these old kits, because they're so thin, they just sing and they're much more open than modern kits. But you say the same old tricks that you used to do years ago, I still do now on them. And it's just speaking to older drummers who have been doing it for years, who bestow little tidbits of knowledge on you that you nick.
And then quite a low Glyn Johns.
No, so this is new. This is new, and this is something I'm definitely doing now. That stole off Steve Albini. So I used to have overheads, would be in a Glyn Johns or just a space pair, and find that was great. But I would tend to mix the overheads really, really low for the kind of records I'm making. I like the drums to be really tight and present, and the overheads sometimes just made them too loose. So, but never had enough crash attack then. So stumbled on a Steve Albini video where he basically does this, and he treats his overheads as spot mics for the cymbals, and then uses this or a stereo pair in front, which is basically the stereo image, and he blends those two together. So what I do now is these basically when they're in basically really close to the crash, but across this plane rather than above it, they never really sound very good above, I don't think. And if you ever actually hit a crash with your ear above it, it doesn't sound very much like a crash. When you stand back, they sound great. So when you mic this plane, you get a much fuller, smoother, more of a bloom to the sound. And having them this close means that they pretty much are spot mics. When you listen to them in isolation and you just hear the groove, it's small, thin, pretty quiet, and then the crash comes in and it's really immediate to that side, and it makes a really usable set of overheads in the mix, really.
So I'm a recorderman guy, or variation on a recorderman. Do you?
Nope.
Are they just there? There's no distance.
They're just moved around a bit, so I'll get the drummer to do left crash, right crash, and just alternate, and I'll just balance them until I get an even, until they both sound good either side. And then there's so little information from anything else.
Oh, so you're not worried about the phase?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, you check the phase of the pair of each one against every other mic, and you get them as tight as you can. But the amount of everything else in this mic is so small that the compromise is fine. It is what it is, and. Generally, I'm riding the crashes a lot in the mix as well. So the overheads are ridden pretty low, like minus 10 or 15, and then they come up. Sometimes come up 7 or 8. Yeah, for the crash hit, so that the crashes explode and then disappear again.
Interesting setup on the snare. What's that?
So that's an M201 and a Calrec condenser. I don't know what it is. CM. Something, Calrec microphone, something.
Are they CMCs?
You tell me.
We'll find that out and flash that up on screen maybe. Anything underneath?
A transformerless SM57 underneath, so it's a bit fatter than an old 57. And I really like that. That's been staple for a long time. And then TLM 193s on the toms, because I never find 41s, which everybody uses. I can never get those to work. And then, I just think condensers on drums, I just think condensers generally, condensers and ribbons, I tend to prefer them. And then a KM84 on the hi-hat.
Yeah. And that's quite high as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's quite way off.
It's just, and but again, I'm cutting out hi-hats when they're not being used, so the hi-hat mic gets the same treatment as the toms.
Yeah.
If there's no hi-hat played, not contributing to the sound, it goes.
I think Massenburg does a kind of a quite high hi-hat vibe. Yeah.
It just sounds
kind of, they sound great.
Yeah, it just seems to sound nice.
Cool.
And then everything just gets moved. You know, you start here and then you just tweak until it all makes a big cohesive
Are you
thing.
using this kit most of the time?
Yeah.
For the sort of the house sound?
Yeah, I mean, it's even not the thing. I don't really do the house stuff in the studio so much as these are. I've got a great house engineer who happens to really like this one as well, but he uses all sorts of different kits. This is basically, I would call this the Al drum sound that I really like.
Right.
That I find it much easier to get the sound I imagine with a kit like this, a thin one that's more open and sings more resonant than a modern kind of dead, maybe very aggressive but not particularly toneful kit.
What's that snare?
That's it's a World Max Black Beauty copy. Right. That's just again I tried and went to the drum shop and tried loads for a few hours and walked home with that. It was my favourite.
Was that ADC?
It was ADC, yeah.
Good old ADC.
So everything here has come from Andy. There's a plug. But I mean, nothing is particularly out of the ordinary. It's just really traditional, classic stuff.
And then what's the crack here? Is that?
So this is the what you call this probably the primary room mic. So it's an AAR88, which is a stereo coincident ribbon.
Are you running that in Blumline?
Blumline, yeah, Blumline. It can do MS, but I've never done it. Right. I don't think. Blumline, it just works. It's just perfect, and it's usually because the room is it's a really aggressive room. It's really loud. It's really bright, and it's great. It's very explosive. So you don't need to push the mic far back in the room to get a massive room sound. And actually, I find that the further there's a point where not just in this room, in every room, a point where I find the room mic disconnects from the close mics, and it almost sounds like two different sounds that don't really work together. I much prefer an image that this is as if you stood in front of the kit, not as if you stood 30 feet back, hearing delayed kit. So it is pretty close for a room mic, and
you're getting the back of this as well.
Yeah, you get everything.
Obviously, it would have been a ribbon, so you're getting all of this.
Yeah, and the great thing about it, because it's so phase coherent. If you listen to it and the drummer's playing like a high kick-hat snare thing, everything is very mono and very central and really strong in the centre, and you go, are we only getting one side of it? And then he'll go to something on the side, and your head will do this, and the imaging is so strong, but the phase coherency is so strong in the centre that it sounds like it's a really robust sounding thing. And because it's a ribbon, it's not too abrasive on the cymbals, it's got a great bottom end, and you just walk around and someone will play, and I'll just roam around the room and go, sounds cool here, grab the mic and put it there, and that's as hard as it gets. So it makes life very easy for positioning when it's all on one stand and it's just that.
Awesome. And really hard. Are these granite?
Yeah. I don't know.
It's stone? Really hard stone. Yeah. Really hard stone. Awesome space. So do you ever put anything out up in here? Or?
That would be the only thing, the PZM.
Oh, right,
that's hanging up there. Sometimes there's two of them. Yeah. And they're PZMs are really bright, you know. They're
the Tandy.
Yeah, just a cheap. I think it's
Radio
about £40 or something. But that sometimes the R88 goes in the corner. Have been known to do 87s up in the back corners, which are cool as well. But if I'm totally honest with you, the room is so colourful that everything sounds the same. So there isn't really the differences in techniques are more to do with, is it a ribbon mic, is it a condenser, is it a dynamic? What do you do with it in the back end? You're going to get stone and big and loud and explosive no matter what you do. Really.
Cool. What's the porthole for?
So the story behind this is Hamby, who built the studio originally in I think 1988. He commissioned Philip Newell to design and build it for him. And in the original design, there was no window in here. And part of Hamby's vision was he wanted daylight in all the studios. And he came in and he was like, there's no daylight. How are we going to solve this? And he said, can I have a window? And Phil said, no, because it's going to wreck the design and we can't do that. So there's a bit of discussion, I think, and Phil challenged him and said, if you can go and find me a round window that's about a foot in diameter, I'll put it in for you. So Hamby, thinking that was never going to happen. So Hamby goes off and he goes down to the docks in Liverpool and he goes to the shipyards and he finds this porthole and he comes back and presents it to Philip, and Philip's there. You know, I said it, I've got to do it now, and that's where the porthole comes in, and it's great, you know, it works, it opens, and I don't know if it's got any kind of sonic impact at all, but it looks cool, so it stays. But the whole building is just really unique. That's why I like it.
Yeah, we'll
so
see outside.
Yeah. Everything is just a bit kind of
crazy place. Crazy place.
It's great for guitars in here as well. I do also guitars, percussion. To be honest, I potentially do everything in here on a record. Right. That's more for convenience. That there's another room for guitar, so I can track two things at the same time.
And it's much deader. I suppose we should amble through. It's a much deader room.
Yeah, I mean,
totally different sound.
this is nice. This is just, it's really cozy, this room. It's bigger than it looks because it's full of tall things, and it's quite tall as well. But
and there's nice natural light comes in as well.
That's it. It's just a very cozy, comfortable room, but it doesn't really have a sound to it. It's just a bit plain, kind of neutral, easy to work with. So generally I'll set it up in kind of zones. So I'll have guitar world or guitar amp world. Sometimes there's a big bass cab there, or the bass cab goes in the cupboard. And then a little area where I do vocals, and I just keep everything kind of pretty much patched in all the time so that I can run around and...
So, I mean, because these are always here when I can...
you've been a few times.
Yeah. Which is great, because then you've got some continuity, I guess, haven't you?
I mean, so James and Loic, my engineers, when they do their sessions, they do change, and they do what they to suit their things. Sure. But because the kind of records I work on are very much have my own ingredients to put those records together, these are part of that now. The workflow is supposed to be as invisible as possible, so I don't want to be having to mess around resetting the studio every time. Monday morning, the studio gets set up how I like it. I'll work Monday to Friday night, and then Friday night or Saturday morning, it gets moved around for the weekend sessions with the engineers, and then I'll come back in and it gets put back how I need it that week again. And generally, I mean, I've got a rack of amps in there, but the cabs live in here. The amps, so we have speaker tie lines that go through.
Do you reamp?
Yeah, all the time. Yeah, all the time.
So you take a DI and...
Usually I'll try and get the sound I like in my head, but sometimes we'll go... Sometimes if I think maybe that's going to develop later on as the production changes, so I'll have a DI to reamp. I don't do it every time.
Right.
Or what I'm quite big on now is using plugins to process the DI signal first and then reamp it. So the crystallizer is pretty much my signature thing now.
Right.
I'm not going to say what it is because every band is going to know, hang on, I'll put that on my guitar, and every other band is going to go, hang on, have we got that as well?
Got to have some secrets.
That's it. But so that, I'll quite often take a DI, mess with it in the box or with things, and then pump it out to an amp so that I can make pedals that don't exist. Yeah. Potentially, which I quite like. And then, mic-wise, this is quite new for me. Usually it would have been SM57s, just one. Yeah. Right up, again, I stole this off Steve Albini, where he uses a really bright mic with, a mic with a great bottom end, which is the 4-4 for me, and then a really bright mic, which is the 421 with the high pass all the way up. Right. So this is really bright, really toppy. That's just full range, and then you blend the two, and that. A nice and good distance back, a foot back or so. That takes away most of the nasty stuff that you don't really hear when you're in the room.
And it sounds more like an amp as well, doesn't it?
I definitely don't find any lack of punch bringing them back, or any I get more bottom end, and it just sounds it's just a fuller signal. And
then you're doing that thing where you're putting some of the sound of the studio into it, rather than anyone can record that.
Precisely.
It gives
the Stone Room gets recorded all the time, so So one of my things I really like to do is. The room mic for the drums gets set where it is, and that creates the most obvious ambience because the drums portray that. And then when I'm doing guitar overdubs, not every time, but if I go, I want to hear some room and some sentiment around the sound on this. I want to hear with the ambience of the record. The doors to the Stone Room stay open, and you just record the room mic as well in the same position it is on the drums, and that sense of perspective builds up. And it's almost like you can visualize, okay, there's a drummer in this area of the room, there's a guitar amp somewhere over in this area of the room, and then I do the same with vocals. There might be a vocalist or backing vocals might be over here, and you can kind of get some sense of placement without moving the room mics. I guess
that's one of the things that real studios have the edge with, and there's still a reason for people to come.
It's capturing a moment, isn't it? It's capturing the result of a lot of creative work and effort and experiences that people have gone through to get those songs and those things. The production process of that in a proper studio is it's sealing all that together and varnishing it and capturing it in something that means something to people. Not to say that home recordings are fantastic, and some of them are staggeringly good, really competitive, but and will mean something to that particular person. But all the other people that have been through that studio, there's no history attached to that. No one walks through and goes,
Dave's bedroom.
Exactly, How many people have been through Dave's bedroom? It depends what Dave is like, I suppose, doesn't it? But how many people? A band is only. A band is only going to come to a studio that Oasis have done the first single in once, and that's going to rub off on their careers and their influences, and that band might continue to grow and be Oasis for 2018 or 19, and there's a sense of history that then kind of divulges itself into that band's career that you don't get when you do things out of studios, I don't think.
I suppose, before we go to vocal world, we could talk about that, actually, because you've done all sorts of stuff here. So many records from the 80s have been done in here, and obviously Recently you did Bring Me the Horizon, didn't you?
Yeah.
Same sort of setup, was that?
Exactly. So, the only difference would be there was a sub kick on the kick. He used his kit, so he has got his own signature thing, and that wouldn't suit their sound. That would just be too soft and not right. But we had a sub kick on the kick instead of the TLM 170, and everything else was exactly the same. Nothing changed at all. The drum sound came from how we tuned the drums, what he played, how he played, and how the rest of the production moulded it. Guitars were done in here. Okay, we did use just 57s on the guitars because that's Lee's preference for. He's really into his sound, and he's got his sound in his head. He knows exactly what it should sound like. So when he's worked with engineers and producers over the past, he's seen what they've done, and he's now gone. Part of my recorded sound is the 57, and then I asked for I push it through the Neve, and we did a little shootout between preamps, but. There was, again, to be honest, that was as simple as it gets making that record. It was all about them and their songs and their delivery that made that what it was, and made that different to the cast record or, different to the other stuff, the Piracy Foundation thing, which all those things have exactly the same. I do the same thing, same process, same microphones, same preamps.
Do you ever hear stuff on the radio and go, "Oh, I think that was made in my studio"? Stuff that you didn't do before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the Stone Room is so it's an iconic sound. So you can. I actually did this recently. We're working on a new website, and so I'm writing a lot of copy for it and looking through the history books about recordings done at the Motor Museum, and I've tried to pick 5 that are the most iconic sounding ones. And the thing that strikes you is it's always the Stone Room that you hear. You hear it on the drums, you hear it on the Jake Bugg record with his vocal and his acoustic guitar, you hear it on the 1975 record with the drums, you hear it on the Two Door Cinema Club record that was mixed here because Mike reamped a load of stuff out in there.
Right, okay.
So you hear it. And I think more stylistically is that the Motor Museum has just attracted a certain generation, or through the generations, a certain kind of culture of bands really like this place and have a real affinity to somewhere like the Motor Museum. So you just hear stylistically, Two Door Cinema Club, the Cortinas, Jake Bugg, Ben Howard, all that kind of late 2000 indie stuff, that slightly alternative, really progressive music has been through here.
Because what the video isn't showing at the moment is that we're in like a Mediterranean villa inside a warehouse in like a really cool part of Bohemian part of Liverpool. So there is definitely like a really weird vibe here. It's so cool.
I think a lot of it is, the lifestyle of it is wonderful. Yeah, because it's healthy, because you've got daylight. You've got places to eat and drink, and you feel like a healthy human, which is usually not what you feel like when you're in the studio for a long time. And I think bands really appreciate that. I think the fact that probably only less than 50% of the whole building is actually a recording studio. The other part of it is outside, kind of recreational space, is really good for the well-being of people. And it's just, I think it's all to do with the history of. I think it's had some historical milestones that then new artists and younger artists really aspire to live that same world. And it just so happens that some of those artists really are fantastically talented and do get to live that world. And then that train kind of keeps going and going and going. So it becomes like a destination for people in a certain type of music to come through here, to have a record on here, because it signifies a certain career path, I think. And it's always been a producer-led studio, and I think the producers, like obviously Mike Crossy was here. Yeah. You did a thing with a while ago, didn't you? And he had a fantastic run here, and then before that there was Andy, who still owns the building, and he did his thing in a much more pop world. But the producers put a real distinct.
We should say that's Andy McCluskey from
McCluskey, from Andy, they put a really distinct kind of signature on the records that come through as well. It's very reflective of the people in the studio, as opposed to some studios, I think, as fantastic as they are, can be more about you hear the studio than you hear the reflection of the people in the studio.
Because it's very much like, almost like a sort of a project studio, but pro level, isn't it?
It's a workshop.
So it's like you can keep all the things that you like set up, and it's not a vast space where you're bringing in orchestras every other day, that kind of thing. It's like certain other places around here and so on. So it's a nice little niche, I guess. Yeah. But let's go to vocal world.
This never changes.
Is it always here?
It's always here. It's either the U87 or the SM7. Actually, I should say sometimes it's in the Stone Room. Right. Okay. If we're going for something that's kind of like raw, if it was a Black Keys record or something like that, and you want the guy to be screaming and shouting, and you need to hear some of that hash,
Yeah.
then yeah, I'd record it in a stone room and I'd get some of that. But for 90% of the things I do, I like the vocal to be really important sounding, really present and upfront. So it's in somewhere that's a bit more controlled in here. And I've got an old U87 that I bought off a friend of mine a few years ago. I don't really know much about it other than it's old. It's quite dented. It's old. that's what I know.
And you use a 7B sometimes too?
Yeah, I do like the SM7.
Yeah.
If the vocal is, if I want the band to sound stronger than the singer, or if I want the band to sound as big as the singer, then the SM7 actually puts the vocalist in the band a little bit more.
Yeah.
The 87 obviously pulls the vocalist forward, but I've got some really lovely. I've got a Manley reference here, a blue bottle, really expensive, fantastically hi-fi things, and I never have much success with those.
It's funny you should say this because I don't know if he's appeared on camera, but we've got Mike Exeter over here lurking in the background.
I haven't lost my voice.
And
You'll be sad to hear.
we did a session a while ago, didn't we?
Yeah.
In
Woodland.
yeah. Where we were comparing a 57 without a transformer.
With an AK-47 or something like that.
Yeah. It was something
really expensive.
Was it like a Paluso?
No, it was one of these 47 reissues,
Yeah.
and it was about 20 times the price or more.
Yeah.
So he's AB in it.
And I had about 7 producers all there, and they looked at me going, "Fuck off."
Yeah.
And it wasn't to say they sounded the same, but in the track with the vocalists. There wasn't not enough difference to and the vocalists felt comfortable in front of a dynamic mic, and it was just that.
I'm using them. I was always 87 because it's classic sounds.
But
I'm using them.
The older ones are great.
Yes, there wasn't like a phase, wasn't there? Where
The
they were good.
The 80s ones aren't so good, but these are.
This is old enough to still have the battery power switch in it. But I mean,
they do different transformer as well.
Oh really?
That's the difference. It's really smooth sound.
I mean, that's been that has been dropped a lot. It's now I'm quite careful with it. I look at it and go, okay, if I got breaks, that's my favourite vocal mic kind of gone. So I've got to be careful with it. But when we did the Bring Me record, actually, funnily enough, we lined up 2 modern 87 AIs, an old, not this one, but an old U87, some Gethel mics, a box, some really, again, an AKG C12, some really expensive hi-fi things. And I really opted for the early 87, the old one, but the rest of the band and Ollie, the singer, adamant, no, the newer one, it's brighter, it's a bit clearer, it's a bit faster sounding. And ironically, that's the one that if you speak to most people, they kind of frown, or from what I gather, they kind of frown on and say, well, it's not a particularly glorious sounding mic. And his vocal sounds, I think it sounds terrific in the production. I think it really captures him beautifully, and he sounds, humongous. But that 87 AI was, beat everything else. Even though on its own it wasn't necessarily the most robust sounding thing. It didn't have the complexity in the mid-range that the older one did. It just suited him, and it got him to where he wanted to go. So I think listening to the singer is really important to tell you, is this doing the right thing? How they hear it in the headphones is
I had that
massive.
with, I worked with a pretty good rock singer a few albums ago.
Right.
And the most important thing was that he was comfortable, and he'd only ever sung in 87.
Yeah.
And even though it was harsh as anything on him, you dealt with it afterwards. Because that's what he wanted. It sounded what he needed to hear. The crappiest signal chain through headphones, but that was him. And he got through take after take after take in no time at all. So there's a very important thing about, it is singer dependent. It's totally, even if you don't think it's the right. Maybe it's like,
I mean, I've never put this up and regretted it ever. No. I've never gone, that's not great. And I think the other piece of the puzzle is once I started to use a 1073 with the EQ, and I started to use the EQ on this, and you realise that the EQ points are probably designed around this era and generation of mic, you kind of go, that really brings out the best of the U87 now. And then you go through an old 1176, a silver one or a black one, and you go, that really brings out, it's been used, it's sold millions of records.
And it's not necessarily that it's a great chain, it just might be that it's the chain that we know.
Exactly. It's very familiar.
And then it's become great because it's...
Yeah.
We should move on. Hearbacks, always nice. Do you trust your artists enough to do their own monitor mixes?
Sometimes you can tell if the headphone mix is bad by listening on the intro. If there's something really odd with the playing, you can tell something's wrong, and then you run and have a quick listen. But no, generally
these are good little beasties, aren't they?
I rely on those. Really like them.
Should we trundle through to the control room?
Yeah.
So what have we got?
So the control arm is based around a Neve 8232, which it came from somewhere in Johannesburg. I just love the sound of it. It just sounds great. And then I exclusively use Unity Audio Boulders for mixing. The original ones, not the Mark IIs, the first ones that I think are just terrific. And then I bought basically the left-hand side.
Loads of toys.
Loads of nice toys, yeah. I sort of divide it into what I imagine is the left brain and the right brain.
Course,
Do you remember I told you this?
Yeah, you were telling me this.
So as I understand it, the left brain is the calculative kind of problem-solving side of your brain, and the right-hand side is the creative. So all the recording equipment, the Pro Tools in the machine room, and the preamps and the compressors, and anything that captures the sound and manipulates it lives on the left. And then anything that creates the sound, so my synths, guitar amps, pedals, instruments would generally be homed on the right-hand side. And it's just a nice way of, probably doesn't mean anything in the workflow, but in my mind, psychologically, it's a nice way of just separating those two worlds a little bit.
And there's a sort of throwback to some of the kind of the electronic vibe.
Yeah.
It's nice to see hardware, synths, and
that's generally the wrap of things I don't know how to use. So the time code stuff, and in my world, it's just never something a tool I've needed. But obviously,
I'm impressed with the 19-inch wide.
Yes, this is
perfect.
Brilliant.
Well, listen, there's a story behind that. So I bought that off my cousin when I think I was 12 or 13, when I was just starting to get into guitar music, and I listened to I've had that since I was 12 or 13. So what's that now?
4 years,
17 odd years, and I've listened to every record that I've ever really got enjoyed has been through that thing. So the monitors are amazing for listening through things, but then to actually to get the goosebumps, you listen on the hi-fi and you get that sense of reminiscing where you remember what your first AC/DC record sounded like, or your first Pink Floyd record, and you go, oh, okay, I'm getting some of those same things, so I'm there.
It's Bob on 19.
It's Bob on.
I know. It was destiny.
I know, really.
Little did you
really
know.
And I think it's good having it. I mean, there's no stereo image with it down there, so it's got to be mono.
Tones go under my desk. On top of each other because it's stereo, but it's points.
That's exactly. Yeah.
Panning doesn't change.
It's so easy to get overwhelmed by monitors and not necessarily even smaller ones. They can just overwhelm you with detail sometimes that you don't really understand where you are again.
Cool. Nice big screen as well.
Yeah.
Do you turn that off for mixing?
Yeah. So that's to help my back when I'm recording, when I'm producing, so I don't have to be like this all day, which is quite unpleasant after a while. So, but when I mix, that goes off and that screen comes on because I mix on the console mostly, so I don't spend too much time over there.
Right.
And I have this nice little thing where you can scroll the mouse into the corner and it brings up a black screen. So as soon as you do that, the visual blocks off and your ears just kind of wake up again, and you listen for a sec and then you go back to do what I'm doing.
We did a little video a while ago with Mike Cave, who's not far from here, who had a raster mouse sticker over his time code display because any visual stimulus would throw him off. So
well, that's all the meters off as well.
What's the name of this? What's the setup you've got for this black screen in the corner? If people want to experiment with that.
So in OS or on the computer, you set the screensaver to be a black image that you Google.
Right.
So you buy the Google plugin, and you search for black screen or black image. You download it, and you just point your operating system to screensaver to look at that black image.
Right, okay.
And then you use hot corners on the Mac, so that when you roll the mouse into the corner of the screen, if you can see this, when you do that, it just goes black. And
right,
you grab
brilliant.
The mouse again and it comes off.
Oh, that's awesome.
Google and hot corners.
So, this is is this like a standard mixing setup?
Yeah, usually the first 16 faders are pretty much always the same. So there'll be a stereo snare sample, which is usually the ambient sound of things. Right. So it's not really necessarily a snare sound as much as it is a snare ambient sound.
And do you make them?
Yeah, bit of both. I've got thousands of them. Yeah. I wouldn't necessarily say I make them from the drum kit I'm recording because I usually get plenty of that on the mics I've recorded. Sometimes.
Just want something different.
More often than not, this is so that I can manipulate the ambience and not manipulate the core drum sound. So if I want to have the snare have way more perceived bottom end without actually making a snare that's got lots of bottom end, then I'll either find a sample or manipulate whatever this sample is to be really weighty and heavy.
And is that one sample that you use, or is it some kind of deep sample?
I've got am I allowed to name drop? I've got lots of Slate ones that I don't really favour the Slate samples as the core sound, but his ambient samples I think are really good. The SSSR and NG and NRG Studio, I think is sampled. And there's a company called That Sound as well that I use a lot. That again, their close samples are great, but I just don't need them. It's the room sounds that they capture are really good. And obviously, because the Stone Room is got so much character to it, sometimes you just need a little bit more than what the Stone Room has, something a little bit different. But to enhance. So this is mostly EQ'd or processed to be really bottom heavy, so that you almost get that big 80s, that sort of the record I'm thinking of is the Peter Gabriel So record, where some of his snares are almost like kick drums that I fell in love with, and that's what this would sound like. And then when you send that to the reverbs, it moves air rather than cracks. And then so you get the crack from your close mic or from whatever else, and then pretty much the same process with a kick sample, but that's a mono kick sample. And then kick, snare, hats, pair of toms, pair of overheads, pair of rooms, and then if I'm using multiple room mics, I'll just get a blender like and they get summed, and that's just the room imaging. The bass comes out on 2 faders. This is something I stole from Michael Brower, so I've got the neck and the body, so the top and bottom end. What I realised actually, when I was thinking about this video, I was kind of thinking, are there any patterns that I definitely do without realising? And what has occurred to me is I'm really into this using top and bottom processing, so like a backsander EQ. So I'll record with a bright and a dark mic on most things, on guitar amps, bass amps, most of the drum kit. When I process things, it'll usually be the top and the bottom, and the mid-range is the mid-range is the difference in the blend between those two. It's like using like a Pultec. You can boost bass and you can boost treble, and wherever you do those things, the combination of that and how the mid-range interacts is the sound. So that's kind of a recurring pattern, I think. So doing this is really nice because you can really hype the bottom end here on the bass body and not compromise the top end sound of it. Different compressor on this one that is more sympathetic to the bottom end. Different compressor on the neck or the sort of mid-range and top that's more sympathetic to that I can dial in some growl if I want. And it's much more quick to blend them than it is to EQ them.
A mastering mentality, isn't it? To split that spectrum up. And cool. And then guitars and
everything. So usually these next 10 faders would usually be instruments of whatever description. So guitars and whatnot. And then usually the vocals will get parked down here.
Okay.
But what I did recently is I was just bringing things. This was quite a complex mix session, so I was just bringing things out in pairs. So one guy's guitars got a pair for himself, and I'd kind of captured what I wanted in Pro Tools. So there wasn't really much to do. It was just volume and kind of moving it. And again, there was so many layers of vocals. It just made more sense to bring them out on a pair, and then just do things with hardware inserts. And this is definitely getting smaller. I'm using less of that side, but I'm making the same result. I'm getting the same results. Really, I don't know why that is. Efficiency, streamlining, but I mean, for the sake of 2 faders, I could move those over there and have something else there. And I'm not going to get a vast benefit in extra summon because it's 2 more faders. It's not really going to do a whole lot. I'm not EQing this because I'm not doing it here. I'm doing it in other places. So there's not a great need to have more console real estate. It fits and it's fine.
And then you print stems as well as
print
a
stems,
mix.
So
for label.
So usually what happens is do the mix, get the mix to where I feel it sounds cool in the analog world. Not to say it couldn't go further, but if I start to do anything more now, I might start eroding what feels great about it. So then I print stems, which are pre-compression and pre any mix bus processing, and then what could be anywhere between like a 40 to 100 and something channel mix multi-track gets down to about 12 stereo stems, 12 or 14, 15, and then I'm working in the box then on it. But I run the mix bus processing on hardware inserts. So I've got a compressor up in the rack there in the machine room, which is the Allen Smart C2, which is just an SSL type compressor, with the knobs are set and they're taped over so you can't move them, and they haven't been moved for about 3 years. And that's basically the sweet spot for me for the SSL compressor, and that lives on a live mix bus hardware insert in Pro Tools. So when the console feeds a track in Pro Tools that has that inserted on it, when I come to print stems, I print to new stereo tracks, deactivate the original multi-track, and those new stereo tracks get routed through that again. So I'm always hearing that live effectively until the end.
And you can drive that harder or
just with a VCA. So rather than a threshold, I've set it so nominally I get enough headroom on it that I can print really hot and not clip, or I can print low enough and get enough gain. And you just VCA it in and out and ride it.
Can I just say, sorry, Russ Russell, one of our other guys, he does something very similar because he has his studio. Sometimes he has to work from home. So he started getting into this thing of actually printing his mixes at the studio as stems. and then he'll go home and do the refinement with a bit of distance.
Yeah.
It's quite an interesting.
That's exactly what I do.
It's very cool.
That's exactly what it is, because I can get a mix. I can fluke a mix to be 100% right in one session, but more often than not, I'll go, I think it feels great. I'll take it home and I'll go, it still feels great, but I'd like to just do this, I'd like to just do that, and just do that, and I genuinely can't do it. I haven't got the attention span or the confidence to do it in one hit. I need at least a sleep on it. So the security of being able to do it in a stem session in the box is the magic, really. I couldn't for economics. I couldn't leave the console forever and ever and ever until revisions come in. And also, I mean, it's so. I actually think for my psychology of it, not having so much to play with is better for me, because I'll fiddle and I'll erode a great mix. So reducing a big session onto the console is the first step in that. Then reducing the console into a smaller session again to what might be a third of the amount of channels is another magic step in making sure that I'm constantly moving forward towards a good mix, not moving sideways around it.
Someone said to me once, there's no such thing as total recall, even on digital audio workstations, because you'll turn it on
exactly,
and
exactly. It never sounds like how you left it. And you know, people say about how the recall, it never recalls the way that you left it. I think actually your ears don't recall it the way that they left it. Quite often I've gone home and I've gone home at 8 p.m. gone, the mix is great. The mix is really good. I've got to tweak something, but the mix is great. Come back in the next day and go, the mix is great, but it doesn't sound like how it sounded to me yesterday, and nothing has changed. It's digitally stored, so it can't change. It's just your ears and your perception are different. But it's, you know, it works. I like it. I'm very comfortable with it. I do like mixing on consoles. I've tried in the box. I've tried hybrid. I've tried all sorts of different funny ways, and sonically they're all fine. But in terms of what suits what is sympathetic to my foibles and definitely helps my strengths is a console that I can just reach and do things and move it, and I feel comfortable here. There's no this visual distraction. The meters are all turned off. You know, the screens are black. It's just good. It just works. I think.
Awesome.
Buy a console, guys.
And it's a cool creative space.
Yeah, I love it.
Yeah. Well, thanks for having us.
No, you're
welcome.
Awesome. Thank you for coming.
Awesome. We should go and play with some instruments and stuff.
Yeah.
From the Bring Me Horizon thing, they're obviously they're quite an established band. Did you get a sense of what this brought to them from overhearing, or what they directly told you as a difference? Because I can imagine how they probably worked in the past. Probably quite different to this.
I think they just wanted somewhere really comfortable. So I didn't actually do the whole record in here. We did the first single in here. The way that we met was that they came through the Moloko group, who represent the studio and represent me to a degree, and they're a label and A&R coordinators were talking and looking for a studio in the north, because the band didn't want to have to come to the south and work there. They also didn't want a studio that was too remote, because all their records in the past have been done in these remote studios. I mean, great ones. Angelic was the last one, and that's a fantastic studio. But for them, they just wanted to be a bit more connected to, they wanted to be able to drive home and these kind of things. So we did the single, and it came off. It worked out really, really well. It exceeded the expectations that we all had. The idea was to get at least some daytime radio play, and it ended up getting A-list, repetitive throughout the day. So everybody was really chuffed. Then when they chose a studio to do the album in, as much as I was gunning for them to do it in here because I was more comfortable here, they were like, no, well, we've got some budget. We'd like to spend it. Otherwise no one else will spend it. So we Googled most fantastic recording studio on the planet, and Blackrock in Santorini came up. So I got the email to say the band would like you to go to Blackrock with them for 2 months and make the record. And I Googled Blackrock. Oh, Santorini. Okay, yes, great. And I think for them, I mean, the lifestyle there was amazing. There was, it was like a film studio. It's like Hollywood. You go, and they just wanted to not be. They just didn't want to feel the burden of making the record. They wanted to make the record comfortably, and any burden would be the creative effort they put in, not the lifestyle burden on them. And it was great for me because it was hot. They brought a personal trainer with them and all sorts.
Did you say the same sort of sensibilities of right, we're going to set up these, this is how we'll do it, it will always be available to record that at any time.
Precisely, exactly. I took a lot of my own gear. The studio was quite cool because it had the control room on one side, and then in the middle it had the big live room, and then on the far side it had what was a booth and a smaller booth behind it, and we set up 2 studios. So I had the big control room and the main live room and the small guitar booth, and then this booth, which was probably about half the size of this room, became the vocal booth with a controller behind it, or a studio behind it, so that they could be working on vocals and arrangement and writing in there whilst I was tracking the band and building the production. So we actually finished about 2 weeks ahead of schedule because we were just flying. And the album was rewritten through that process and refined a lot, but the same sense of trying to remove as much of the technical kind of guff as possible, the drudgery, and just mean that you walk in with your coffee in the morning at 9 a.m. and you just turn it on, you're there, the amp is playing, the drums are playing, everything is just done. And I think as well, because we were refining the record and rewriting it a lot, there were songs where we redid the drums or dropped in on drum parts on week 5 of week 10. Well, so if the drum sound changed drastically, then we're gonna notice. So it was important to make sure that we got it right on the first week. We got the best sounds we could get, and then say, okay, they are the sounds defined for the record. And we really documented any changes that I made had to be documented, and the assistants kept these really good notes. And then when it was okay, we're going to go back and recut the drums on the first song, or we need to drop in a drum fill, which was that was happening. Then you spent 10 minutes recalling everything. We were measuring things. We had diagrams. Go back to how it was. Cool. Put it back. But I really like that hands-on workshop kind of approach to it, really.